Right now, somewhere across this country, millions of hardworking people are staring at their bank account balances and feeling a quiet sense of satisfaction. Maybe you are one of them. You have $10,000 saved up, or maybe even $50,000, and that number gives you a feeling of security, a sense that you have done things right, that you have listened to your parents and followed the rules. Society handed you about how responsible adults handle their money. You feel protected, you feel smart, and that feeling, as understandable as it is, might be the most expensive emotion you have ever allowed yourself to experience. The uncomfortable reality that almost nobody in your life is going to sit you down and explain is that the money sitting in your savings account is not just sitting there, it is shrinking. Not in a way you can see clearly on your statement, not in a way that triggers any alarms, but in a slow, invisible, mathematically certain way that is costing you real purchasing power every single day. There is an invisible tax being applied to every dollar you own. And the institution holding your money is not only aware of it, they're profiting from it enormously while you bear the entire cost. To understand how this works, you have to be willing to look honestly at the numbers. Because the banks have built their entire business model on the hope that you never actually do this math yourself. The average traditional savings account in America pays interest that amounts to a tiny fraction of a single % annually. Meanwhile, inflation, the steady and relentless rise in the cost of everything from groceries to rent to healthcare, runs at roughly 3% per year or more, depending on economic conditions. When you subtract what the bank pays you from what inflation takes from you, you are left with a negative return. You are not preserving your money. You are losing it at a rate that compounds quietly over time into a genuinely staggering figure. Consider what that actually looks like in real numbers. You have $50,000 sitting in a standard savings account today, and inflation continues its historical pace. That money will have the purchasing power of roughly $37,000 a decade from now. You will not have spent a cent of it. You will not have done anything wrong by the traditional definition of financial responsibility. And yet, you will have lost the equivalent of $13,000 in real value. This is what could be called the silent heist, because while you sleep soundly, believing your money is safe, the bank is lending it out for car loans, mortgages, and credit card debt at interest rates of 7, 15, even 25%. It's paying you almost nothing in return, and allowing inflation to quietly consume whatever small amount of value remains. You are the raw material in their profit factory, and you are supplying your labor for free. The reason so many intelligent, educated, genuinely hardworking people fall into this trap is not a failure of intelligence. It is a feature of human psychology that made perfect sense in a different era, but works against you in the modern financial world. When you grew up watching money be scarce, when financial instability was a real and present threat in your household, your brain developed a powerful association between visible cash and survival. A large pile of money in an account acts like a chemical sedative for the part of your brain responsible for processing threat. It quiets the alarm, tells your nervous system that winter is survivable, that you have enough stored resources to make it through whatever comes next. This is not a character flaw. It is biological programming doing exactly what it was designed to do. But here is the problem. That same psychological programming creates something behavioral economists call loss aversion, which is the well-documented tendency for the pain of losing something to feel psychologically about twice as intense as the pleasure of gaining the equivalent amount. You look at an investment account and see a 10 or 20% temporary drop, and your brain registers it as danger, as loss, as something to escape from. Meanwhile, your savings account shows a perfectly stable number, and your brain registers that as safety, even as the purchasing power of that stable number silently erodes. You are choosing the guaranteed slow loss over the temporary visible fluctuation. Not because it is mathematically smarter, but because it feels emotionally safer. And that feeling is costing you your financial future. It also helps to understand the mechanics of what actually happens to your money once it enters a bank. Many people operate under a vague assumption that their dollars sit somewhere in a vault, tagged with their name, waiting patiently for their return. The reality is fundamentally different. Banks operate under a system called fractional reserve banking, which means they are legally required to keep only a small fraction of your deposit accessible at any given time. The vast majority of what you deposit is immediately lent out to other borrowers at much higher interest rates than they will ever pay you. Your financial security becomes someone else's car loan. Your emergency fund becomes someone else's home equity line of credit. And the bank pockets the spread between what they charge borrowers and the near nothing they pay you. Every single month, indefinitely. The even more sobering calculation is what economists call opportunity cost, which is the price you pay not just in inflation losses, but in the wealth you never built because your capital was sitting idle instead of working. Suppose you are keeping $50,000 in savings because it feels safe. But honestly, for genuine emergencies, you only truly need about $10,000 readily accessible. That means $40,000 is sitting there providing you with emotional comfort that has a real and calculable price tag. If that $40,000 had been invested in a simple, low-cost index fund earning the stock market's historical average return of approximately 10% annually, it would grow to roughly $697,000 over 30 years. That means the decision to keep that money in cash for emotional reasons did not cost you nothing. It cost you over $650,000 in wealth that your future self will never have. You paid the bank hundreds of thousands of dollars over your lifetime for the privilege of babysitting. Money you did not even need to touch. That is the most expensive insurance policy ever sold, and nobody even told you that you were buying it. A major part of escaping this trap requires being brutally honest about what actually constitutes a financial emergency. Because most people have a dangerously vague definition that causes them to hoard far more cash than any reasonable emergency scenario would require. A roof that will need replacing in 5 years is not an emergency. It is a planned capital expenditure, and it should have its own dedicated savings bucket with a specific timeline and a specific target. A vacation you want to take next year is not an emergency. Your emergency fund exists for one purpose only, which is to prevent you from having to sell assets at the worst possible moment because life threw something unexpected at you. It is financial oxygen. When the market crashes and you lose your job in the same month, the person with no cash reserves is forced to sell their investments at the bottom to pay rent, permanently destroying wealth that would have recovered if they had simply been able to wait. Liquidity matters. The emergency fund matters. But the emergency fund has a ceiling, and most people have never thought about where that ceiling is. The way to think about this structurally is to imagine a ladder with 3 distinct rungs, each serving a specific purpose with its own rules. The first rung is what you might call the operational buffer, the money that lives in your checking account and covers roughly 1 month of expenses with a small cushion on top so that you never overdraft, and the practical machinery of your daily financial life runs without friction. You do not worry about the return on this money. Its only job is utility. The second rung is your true emergency fund, and this money should not be sitting in a traditional bank account earning nothing. It should be in a high-yield savings account, earning 4 or 5%, which means your emergency fund is at least fighting back against inflation rather than surrendering to it. If you are single and renting, 3 months of essential expenses is sufficient. If you have a family, a mortgage, or more complex financial obligations, 6 months is the appropriate target. Once that second rung is full, the rules change completely. And this is where most people fail to follow through. You must stop filling it. Every additional dollar beyond that threshold must be redirected with intention into the third rung, which is your wealth-building engine. The third rung is where the transformation actually happens. Every dollar that enters this level gets deployed into assets, whether that means maxing out tax-advantaged retirement accounts, contributing to a taxable brokerage account, or investing in real estate. These assets do not just sit there. They work. They generate returns that compound over time. They give you ownership stakes in the companies and industries that drive the global economy. They allow you to stop being a consumer of the financial system and become an owner of it. When you buy an index fund, you are not gambling. You are buying a proportional piece of thousands of companies simultaneously. And you are betting on the general idea that human civilization will continue to create value over time, which is historically the safest long-term bet anyone has ever been able to make. If the idea of moving a large sum of money into investments all at once produces the kind of anxiety that would cause you to abandon the plan entirely, there is a straightforward strategy that removes the psychological weight from the decision. Divide your excess cash into 6 equal portions and automate a transfer of 1 portion into your investment account on the first of each month for 6 consecutive months. This approach is called dollar cost averaging, and its real power is not just mathematical, but psychological. You are no longer making one enormous decision that feels irreversible. You are making a series of smaller, automated, emotionally manageable commitments. And if the market drops after your first transfer, your next transfer buys more shares at a lower price, which actually lowers your average cost and improves your long-term position. The volatility that your primitive brain registers as danger becomes a mechanical advantage when you have automated a system that buys more when prices fall. There is also a tax dimension to this conversation that the wealthy understand, and the average saver almost never considers. Interest income from savings accounts is taxed at your ordinary income tax rate, which is the highest rate you pay on any form of income. Capital gains from investments held for more than 1 year are taxed at a significantly lower preferential rate. This means that by keeping your money in savings, you are not only accepting the lowest possible returns, but also subjecting those meager returns to the highest possible taxes. Moving money into investments does not just increase your potential growth. It simultaneously improves your tax efficiency, which compounds the advantage. Even further, over long periods of time, the shift this all requires is fundamentally one of identity. As long as you see yourself as a saver, your goal is to accumulate cash, and the sight of a high balance feels like success. When you begin to see yourself as a capital allocator, every dollar becomes an employee with a job description, a performance expectation, and a defined role. An employee sitting idle in your checking account beyond what is operationally necessary is sleeping on the job, and sleeping employees do not build wealth. Your job as the allocator is to make sure every dollar is deployed into the role where it can produce the most long-term value for your future. The deeper truth underneath all of this is that comfort is not free. The emotional comfort of a large cash balance carries a real and quantifiable price. And that price is paid not today, but in the future, in the form of retirement security you do not have, in the form of options and freedom that close themselves off quietly while you were busy feeling safe. The wealthy do not hold large portions of their net worth in cash because they understand that cash is a depreciating asset. Every day they hold a dollar, it is worth slightly less than it was the day before. Money must be in motion to grow. And stagnant money is by definition dying money. Real financial freedom does not come from a pile of cash sitting in a bank account. It comes from owning assets that generate returns even while you sleep, that grow independent of your labor, that give you the capacity to weather any storm without having to sell anything at the worst moment. The path to that freedom runs directly Through your willingness to cap your cash, respect the ceiling on your emergency fund, and systematically deploy everything above that line into productive assets. It requires tolerating the discomfort of watching numbers fluctuate on an investment screen and training your brain to interpret that volatility not as loss, but as the normal texture of long-term wealth creation. Every day you delay is another day that inflation is quietly shaving value off the money you worked hard to earn. The best time to begin this process has already passed, but the second best time is right now, today. With the information you have in front of you, calculate your real monthly expenses, multiply by 6, and define your absolute cash ceiling. Look at everything above that number and recognize it for what it is, which is lazy money, fearful money, money that is slowly losing the race against time. Then move it, automate it, and stop paying the invisible tax that has been silently collecting on your anxiety for years. You have the understanding to do this. What remains is simply the decision